Hello everyone, and welcome to your 80th Cocoa programming tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to be exploring the field editor in AppKit, and we're going to be talking about ways that we can customize its behavior, and also ways that we can completely customize the field editor itself. Now, what is a field editor? Well, the field editor is an NSTextView instance that gets placed on top of any text field that you are trying to edit. So as soon as I go to edit an NSTextField, there is going to be a field editor that gets placed right on top of it. And so the thing that I'm editing right now is known as the field editor, and it's actually an NSTextView instance. And this text view instance is shared across all standard text fields that we have in our application, or rather in our window. So the window will vend a particular NSTextView to be the field editor for all different text fields in your application. And there are ways that we can customize this so that we actually have a different field editor in some cases, or we can customize the control itself in ways that will give us different behavior on the field editor. So without further ado, let's talk about the 5 little instances that I have here, and we'll learn more about the field editor as we go. So the very first case here is a completely custom NSTextView that is going to be serving as my field editor. So I'm not using the standard one that the window is vending to me. We're actually telling it that I want a custom one, and this custom one is drawing this red border around the text that you see here. And as I type some words, and we also are interpreting spaces to be underscore. So anytime I type a space, I'm going to insert an underscore. And we can see that once I surpass 8 characters, we change the border to be a green color. So we are kind of dynamically changing what our field editor looks like as I type different characters. Now, this is kind of a stretch example of why we might want to make our completely custom field editor, but we'll talk about the SecureTextField in a bit as well, which has another instance of a custom implementation. All right, this other case is the delegate case, and this is just a case where we're delegating some of the responsibility out to somebody else, and we can interpret the events of the field editor, and we can change the behavior. So by default, the field editor will have the behavior that if you hit the return key, it'll basically just not insert a new line character. And so we've changed the behavior in this text field so that if I type in a word and more, right, we can see that every time I hit return, I'm actually going down a line in my text field, right? So I have multiple lines in my text field here. And basically, this is just we're interpreting the events and changing the behavior of what the default field editor will be. And we'll talk about how we do that in just a bit as well. Another case is just having a formatter on a text field. And the formatter is pretty simple. You can just assign a particular formatter. In this case, I'm using a number formatter, and it will format the text after we've done it. So this is another way that we can customize the way our text field will look when all is said and done. Okay, the very custom case, probably the most custom case in the system, is the secure text field. And the secure text field, right, is when you're entering a password, you have some dots that will be representing your password. And if I hit the caps lock key, there will actually be a caps lock indicator that shows up to indicate that, to the user, hey, you're using the caps lock key, just be careful if you're trying to enter a password. All right, so that's what the secure text field does, and this is a completely custom implementation of this NSTextView that you see. So they're using a very, very custom implementation, which we'll check out in just a bit. And then we have the token text field, which we looked at in a past tutorial, and we can see that when we enter a value and hit return, by default, it will tokenize that text. All right, so with all that said, let's dive into the debugger to kind of see what's happening here. So first I'm going to select the delegate case because it actually has no real custom implementation for a field editor. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click on our view debugger here. And with our delegate case selected, we can automatically see kind of what this field editor is doing. So all the other text fields are just one NSText field, right? They're just flat NSText fields with drawing the output. However, you can see in the case that when we're editing in our text field, what ends up happening is that we get this new NSTextView instance that we can see up here, a TextView instance that is put on top of our text field, right? So here's our NSTextField back here, and we're placing on top of that a field editor where we're actually going to edit our text. And that's what the field editor does. So, and again, the field editor is shared across all text fields by default, and basically you just have one field editor instance that gets replaced in all of our standard NSTextField instances. All right, one case I want to look at in particular is the SecureTextView though, because it does have a custom implementation. And so let's see what that looks like if we dive into the View debugger. So here, if I click on the NSTextView instance that's up front, we can actually see that this is a custom subclass of NSTextView called NSSecureTextView. And if you want to find out kind of more about that, you can dive into sort of class dump, and there's some more information kind of on how you can play with that. What's more interesting is if I copy on this guy as well. So I'm just going to copy and paste the TextView instance from our our secure text field. And what I'm going to grab from this is the text storage. And if I check out what the text storage is, it's actually not going to show me, so let me just do the class of that. So if I look at the class of what the text storage is, and the text storage is just the backing, basically representation of the text on NSTextViews. If I look at the class on that, we can actually see that it has a custom text storage implementation for NSSecureTextStorage. So again, the whole point of this is just to show you that there are very custom implementations for your field editor, and NSSecureTextField is a case where it does have very custom field editor and text storage implementations behind the scenes. And that's pretty much the only case that you probably want to have a custom text field instance. And it's very easy to get them wrong. So even as a simple example, I'm using Catalina in my current Mac right now. And if I just type a couple more keys here, and now I'm going to hit Command left, and you can see that all of a sudden I'm missing text. But what's even worse is that if I arrow to the left, all of a sudden the text field just kind of stopped drawing anything. And now that I know this bug, maybe I'll report it to Apple. But it's just a great example of how it is very difficult to do custom implementations for text field editors. And it's something I really just don't suggest anybody does, because it's pretty easy to get it wrong. So with that said, let's dive into what we did for some of these custom implementations. So the first one I want to talk about is the delegate case, which is very simple. So the delegate case, I've wired up on the text field itself. I wired up the delegate to point to the app delegate. Again, not the place that this should be, but this is all for example's sake. So the NSTextField that I have in my main menu nib, so just to show this to everyone here, this guy, if I right click on it, we can see that the delegate is wired up to my app delegate. So if I implement the delegate for NSTextField, there is different ways that we can actually interpret the text view that we're getting back here. So if I look at some of these things, there are different methods for interpreting control events. And most of this should actually cover, I'd say 90% of the cases that you want to care about, right? So we can interpret all the cases like when the text changes, or when we start editing, or when we finish editing. And the important one that I have here is for the control text view to do command by selector. And sorry, that was in Objective-C, but the Swift version here looks like this, where we have control text view do command by command selector. So what this means is that we can interpret the different commands that we get triggered by the text field, or the field editor in this case, and we can forward those events onto this delegate and interpret them in different ways. So the selector, right, is just an Objective-C selector, and we can interpret different ones that come our way. So we can check, mouse up, mouse down, anything that comes from basically NSResponder. So pretty much any of these, tons of different events that might be triggered on the NSTextView instance. And the one that I'm interested in this case is this insert new line, because by default for a field editor, the behavior is to just not insert new lines, but we can override this behavior by actually telling it to say, well, if we receive a new line character in this case, what we actually want to do is we do want to insert that, ignoring the field editor, right? So by default, the insert new line is going to actually do something different, and we're going to override that behavior to insert a new line anyway, ignoring the field editor. And then you basically just return true if you did something as a result of this. So if you change the behavior, you return true to say don't do the default behavior, and false if you didn't actually change any of the behavior. All right, so that's a simple example of doing the text field delegate to control the behavior for the field editor. Now, the number formatter case is pretty simple as well. We really didn't do anything for that. We simply, if I click on my text field here, you can create a new one by simply doing, let me get out of caps lock here. If we look for a text field, we can actually find a text field with number formatter. But if you don't want to do that, you can look for any kind of formatter. So if I just look for a formatter and I drag one of these formatters onto the text field, it will try to interpret that text as well on the formatter. So you can basically just drag any of these formatters onto the text field, and we can see this number formatter is on our cell right here. All right. Okay, the next one that I want to dive into is our custom implementation. So this is if you can't implement what you want using the delegate implementations or the number formatter, then you can fall back to using a custom implementation. And this is kind of the meat of the fun in this tutorial. But I do want to emphasize that this is probably not what you want to do because it is difficult to get right. And unless you absolutely need this custom behavior, I would just suggest not doing it. All right, so with that out of the way, we can see some things here. So the custom field that we have, let me go back to my main menu nib for just a second. Our custom field editor looks like this. So our custom text field implementation here. So our custom text field is just a standard NSTextField, but it has a custom cell behind it. And the custom cell is this custom field cell. And what that looks like is like this. So I have this NSTextField cell subclass. And to change the field editor for a particular text field, we can implement this in the cell and override our field editor to return a different value for our field editor. And in this case, I called it something else that I renamed in this tutorial, but I'll rename it now just to make more sense. Custom field editor, there we go. And basically, we are going to return this custom field editor for this particular instance. So every time we have a custom field cell, we're going to give back this new NSTextView instance that we have called custom field editor. Now, custom field editor is its own special use case. So the field editor, like I was saying before, is a subclass of NSTextView, or it is an NSTextView. And basically what we're doing in this case is we're customizing some of the behavior that we might want to have. So this first little thing that I'm doing is also something that you might need if you want to implement a particular behavior for a field editor, is that we're overriding how we can write to the pasteboard. And in this case, what I'm saying is that I'm not going to allow anything to be written to the pasteboard on this application. What does that mean? Well, it means that I can't copy this text. So if I try to copy it, and if I pasted it, you can see that I'm not getting the value that I try to copy, right? So I can't copy the text, and I can't drag it out of here. Basically, this is an implementation where we wouldn't allow you to do writing to the pasteboard. And where does that come in handy? Well, if you were implementing something like a secure text field, you don't want people to just copy and paste from the password field and put it out. So there's an example there. So that's one thing that you can do. And we can see some other stuff that we're doing in this custom implementation as well. So in the draw call, this is where we're setting up our little color, a little outline color on our text field or text view. And so this little green color that you see, or the red color that you see, right, is being driven by the NSTextView instance. So if I'm drawing and I'm basically just checking to see is the length of the text storage bigger than some amount, then I'm going to go ahead and draw a color around it. So nothing too crazy in this implementation, right? We're just disallowing the ability to copy, and we just are replacing our drawing behavior a little bit. And we're also specifying that this should be a field editor. So there is a property on NSTextView to specify whether you want field editor behavior, and this just changes the interpretation of the commands for tab, shift tab, and return. And it just allows you to, obviously tab will jump to a next field if it's a field editor. If it's not, it will just interpret it as a tab command. So another option, if you didn't want those, the ability to tab through, you could actually just set this field editor to be false, and you could still use it as a field editor. It just wouldn't behave like a field editor with those particular, tab and return keys. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is the custom text storage that's behind this. So you can implement a custom text storage, and that's what the NSSecureTextField does. And NSSecureTextField does some funky stuff where it'll basically jump back and forth between showing bullets or having the actual text. And most of the time, the text storage actually is just holding the regular text. It mostly just switches over to show bullets when it's drawing the code. And I'm going to show you a little bit of an instance of how that works out in just a bit. But that's essentially how the secure text field is doing it, where it just has some custom text storage. And depending on when it wants to show the bullets, it's going to show bullets. And when it doesn't want to show the bullets, it's going to do something else. Okay, the last little thing here is this implementation that we have. So if you are subclassing NSTextStorage, it actually specifies a lot of this if we dive into it. So if I look at NSTextStorage documentation, it says that we basically have to override these 4 different methods if we want our own subclass of NSTextStorage, as it is this semi-abstract subclass of the implementation. So here is what we would do. I have the storage stored as an NS mutable attributed string, and then we implement the 4 methods here. So we return the string. If the attributes are always the same, then you're just always showing the attributes. And here, the 2 kind of interesting ones are the replace characters and setting the attributes. So as I'm typing, this replace characters is going to be called to insert new characters into your backing storage. So your string value that's being passed in is whatever the new characters are that are being inserted, and the range will tell you where they're inserted in. And basically, you can just interpret that as you want. So here, I'm just using replace characters, and then I'm just replacing any instances where I have a space with an underscore, and then I'm just sending that on to our backing storage to run its implementation of replace characters. And then the other important thing is that you should always call begin editing and end editing to notify the text storage that something was actually changed. And same with set attributes. We're basically just forwarding on whatever the attributes are to our backing storage implementation. So nothing really fancy here, but this is the bare minimum pretty much of what you would have to do if you want your own custom text storage implementation. And again, if you were doing something like a secure text field, you would have to do something fancy in here to basically enable or disable the showing of bullets in the text view. All right, so that's kind of the gist of what I want to show for this. The very last thing is just this fun little debugging dive into NSSecureTextStorage. So if I go into here, I have some breakpoints already set up. And the one that I want to look at is particularly this begin secure text mode, or begin secure mode on NSSecureTextStorage. And if you remember, NSSecureTextStorage is the backing storage of the NSSecureTextField, or its field editor rather. So I'm going to go ahead and have a breakpoint on that. And let's go ahead and go back to my application. And now I'm going to click on Secure Text Field, and immediately it's going to try and redraw. And if I look at some of this implementation, we can actually see what ends up happening. So basically, we click on the field editor, and the field editor instance is this NSSecureTextView, and it's going to perform a draw rect call. And NSSecureTextStorage has this begin secure mode. And begin secure mode basically is switching between showing bullets and not showing bullets. And so anytime it goes into secure mode, it basically will switch its text to be the secure text. And when it's ending the secure mode, it's going to basically go back to being a standard string implementation, because at the end of the day, it still needs to know what the string is when we're trying to get the string value from it, right? If I type in a password, it can't just be bullet values. It actually has to have a real string behind it. So we have to have some way to toggle between the two values. And the way that they're doing that, at least, is with changing the secure mode for the text storage itself. And so if I look at the drawRect call for our secure text view, we have this begin secure mode, and basically they go in and redraw some of the, so here they're basically invalidating some of the glyphs so that they can show the bullets. And if we keep going down a little bit here, they will eventually call a super drawRect call. So here is where they're calling into super drawRect. So here's the super call for drawRect, and then they end secure text mode, going back to the standard text that they're inserting into the text field. So it's a very interesting implementation, and I'm actually not fully aware of how they managed to implement some of the behavior in it, but it is interesting at least to look at, to give you an idea of how you could implement a custom drawing if you wanted to change how the characters appeared, or even show, if you explore into this, you can actually see how they draw the little caps lock key that we were talking about as well. So there's sort of information on how they get this little key to appear in there as well. So it's kind of just interesting to look at if you're interested in how you might implement something similar to SecureTextField, but by all means, please don't do this because it's super difficult. And as we saw earlier in this video, they don't even really do it right because they have bugs with that as well, as you can see right here. And so, yeah, it's not a perfect solution. And so you're best off just trying to use the delegate methods all at the best you can. And that's pretty much all I have for this tutorial. So if you have any other questions, feel free to leave your questions in the comments section below. And hopefully this was informative on how you can actually change the behavior of editing in the text field. The very last thing I want to point out is if you want to edit certain things like the background color or other things in the text, the field editor, a lot of these will be derived from the text field itself. So as an example, just before we end this video, the very last thing here is that if I change, so on the NSTextField instance itself, if I change the background color for the text field, and I go ahead and run this again, this information will also be propagated up to the text field editor. And we can even see this if we jump into the view debugger. We can see that the text view instance will also become this color, right? So we can see that there's actually a backing color on this value, and that's what we end up getting. So we are going to push, a lot of the standard values that you want to appear in the field editor. A lot of these can just be customized by simply customizing the text field. So at the end of the day, my summary here is try not to do a custom field editor because it's difficult and you'll probably do it wrong. But if you're interested, this is an example of how you can create such a thing. Anyway, I will see you guys in another upcoming tutorial. See you guys then. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and share it with your friends. Ways to contribute and additional information are in the description. I'll see you next week.